A Supreme Court decision has just been handed down in a unanimous 9-0 ruling that almost no one expected. And it's set to reshape what you think you know about your gun rights and what law enforcement can legally do during a traffic stop. If you own a firearm and you drive, what you're about to hear over the next several minutes could be the difference between driving away without issue or facing serious federal charges you didn't even realize were possible. Before we get into the details, take a second and hit that subscribe button. Why? Because the overwhelming majority of gun owners miss major legal updates like this. And when they finally learn about them, it's often from an officer standing at their car window instead of from a reliable source breaking it down clearly. I don't want that to be you. So subscribe now and make sure you stay informed. Now let's talk about what just happened. The Supreme Court ruled on a case that directly connects your Second Amendment right to bear arms with your Fourth Amendment protection against unreasonable searches and seizures, foreign to seizures. On the surface, those sound like two separate constitutional protections, but this ruling ties them together in a way that impacts anyone who carries a firearm in a vehicle. The case is called Torres v. Madrid. Even if that name doesn't sound familiar, the court's decision absolutely matters to you. Here's how it all started. During a routine traffic stop in New Mexico, a driver was pulled over. Inside his vehicle was a legally owned firearm. The officer asked him to step out of the car, which officers are permitted to do for safety reasons. Then the officer asked a key question. Were there any weapons in the vehicle? The driver responded honestly. He said there was a gun in the glove compartment and that he had a valid concealed carry permit. Straightforward. Cooperative. Lawful. But what happened next became the center of the entire legal battle. Without obtaining a warrant and without establishing probable cause that a crime had been committed, the officer conducted a full search of the vehicle. It wasn't a brief safety check. It was a complete search. The officer's justification? He claimed that the mere presence of a firearm in the vehicle created safety concerns that allowed him to search without a warrant. During the search, the officer discovered older ammunition that violated a minor local ordinance, something the driver reportedly didn't even know about. He was arrested. Here's what shocked many observers. The lower courts sided with the officer. They ruled that if a firearm is present in a vehicle, even if it is legally owned and properly permitted, that fact alone could justify a warrantless search. Think about what that would mean. It would mean that exercising your Second Amendment rights could automatically weaken or eliminate your Fourth Amendment protections. You'd effectively have to choose between carrying a firearm legally or maintaining full protection against unreasonable searches. Let's break this down clearly. The Fourth Amendment protects you from government searches and seizures without proper justification. In most situations, that means officers need a warrant or probable cause. Probable cause requires specific, objective facts indicating that a crime is being committed. Not a guess, not a hypothetical concern. The Second Amendment protects your right to keep and bear arms. The core legal question before the Supreme Court was this: does simply having a legal firearm in your vehicle automatically give police the authority to search your vehicle without a warrant? The court's answer was unanimous. No. All 9 justices agreed that the presence of a legally possessed firearm does not by itself create probable cause and does not justify a warrantless search. The court made it clear that lawful gun ownership cannot be treated as inherently suspicious activity. If it could, millions of Americans would lose Fourth Amendment protections simply because they exercised a right the Constitution explicitly guarantees. The court stated plainly that you cannot be treated as suspicious solely for engaging in constitutionally protected conduct. Quick note, this is educational information summarizing the court's ruling. It is not legal advice for your individual situation. If you're facing a real legal issue, consult a qualified attorney. Understanding Supreme Court decisions, however, helps you better understand your rights. If this breakdown is helpful, make sure you're subscribed. In the next video, I'll explain the exact 5 words defense attorneys recommend saying when an officer asks whether you're carrying a weapon. And those 5 words are grounded in real legal strategy and can help you avoid self-incrimination. That video drops in 3 days. Don't miss it. Now let's talk about what this ruling actually means for you. First, if you are legally carrying a firearm in your vehicle and you're pulled over for a routine traffic issue, like speeding or a broken taillight, the officer cannot use the mere existence of your legal firearm as justification to search your entire vehicle. They must have independent probable cause of criminal activity. Second, this ruling does not eliminate officer safety measures. Officers may still ask you to step out of your vehicle during a stop. That authority has been established in prior Supreme Court precedent. If they can articulate a specific safety concern, they may temporarily secure the firearm during the encounter. However, what they cannot do is escalate a routine stop into a full vehicle search solely because you disclosed that you are lawfully carrying a firearm. Third, this ruling protects honest, cooperative citizens. Many gun owners worry that disclosing a legally carried firearm will automatically trigger an invasive search. The Supreme Court's decision reinforces that your honesty about lawful gun ownership cannot be used as justification for a warrantless search. That's a significant protection for law-abiding individuals. But there's another important piece of this ruling that deserves close attention. The court also addressed the automobile exception to the Fourth Amendment. Under this legal doctrine, police may search a vehicle without a warrant if they have probable cause to believe it contains evidence of a crime. The rationale behind this exception is mobility. Vehicles can quickly leave the scene and evidence could disappear while officers wait for a warrant. Some lower courts had stretched this exception too far. They treated the presence of a legal firearm as equivalent to probable cause. The Supreme Court rejected that reasoning. The automobile exception still exists, but it requires actual probable cause of criminal activity, not speculation, not general safety concerns, and not lawful behavior. A legal firearm, standing alone, does not meet that standard. Let's walk through a clear example to understand how this works in practice. Imagine you're pulled over and the officer smells marijuana coming from your vehicle. In states where marijuana remains illegal, that odor could provide probable cause to search because it's sensory evidence suggesting a potential crime. That's very different from simply knowing there's a legally owned firearm inside your car. A gun, by itself, is not evidence of criminal activity if possession is lawful. The court emphasized that distinction. Now, here's where it becomes important to understand the limits of this ruling. The Supreme Court was precise about what it decided. It ruled that legal gun ownership alone does not justify a warrantless search, but the court also made clear that other factors, what courts call additional articulable facts, can change the legal analysis. So what might those additional factors look like? If you are legally prohibited from possessing firearms due to a felony conviction or another disqualifying status, and the officer knows that knowledge could establish probable cause. If the firearm is visible and you're in a jurisdiction where open carry is restricted or requires a permit that you do not have, that could create probable cause. If you are acting in a way that goes beyond ordinary nervousness during a traffic stop, for example, evasive behavior combined with other suspicious indicators, those facts together might amount to reasonable suspicion or probable cause. If there is evidence of other criminal activity in plain view, such as illegal substances or drug paraphernalia, the firearm may become one element of a broader set of facts supporting a search. The key principle from the ruling is this: lawful behavior cannot automatically be converted into suspicion, but lawful behavior combined with independent evidence of a crime can alter the legal situation. Now let's talk about what this means moving forward. Supreme Court rulings establish precedent. That means lower courts across the country must follow the legal standards set by this decision. A unanimous 9-0 decision sends a strong message. It signals that the justices saw this as a clear constitutional issue. The message to lower courts and law enforcement agencies is direct. The Second Amendment and the Fourth Amendment are not in conflict. They operate together. For years, some departments trained officers to treat the presence of a firearm during a traffic stop as automatically escalating the situation and potentially justifying expanded searches. That training often relied on lower court interpretations that have now been rejected. Departments may now need to update policies and training materials to reflect this clarification. Lawful gun ownership is not, by itself, Suspicious activity. For you as a firearm owner, this ruling strengthens your position if you believe your vehicle was searched solely because you had a legal firearm. If an officer's only articulated reason for a search is the presence of your lawfully possessed firearm, you now have Supreme Court precedent supporting the argument that such a search violates the Fourth Amendment. That does not mean you should argue roadside constitutional law during a traffic stop. Never escalate a situation at the scene. Comply with lawful orders. Remain calm. Save legal challenges for court, where your attorney can raise constitutional arguments effectively. Ça va. But knowing this precedent exists matters. Here's something important to understand. A Supreme Court ruling does not instantly eliminate all disputes or improper conduct. Even when the law is clarified, real-world situations can remain complicated. There will still be cases where officers interpret facts differently. There will still be instances where additional factors are present. There may be officers who are unfamiliar with the ruling or who apply it narrowly. That's why staying informed about current legal standards is critical. Now let's look at some real-world scenarios where complications can still arise. If you're in a state with particularly complex firearm regulations, an officer might believe you are violating a state or local law. Even if that belief turns out to be incorrect, the officer may argue that it formed the basis for probable cause. If you're stopped in what law enforcement characterizes as a high crime area, and there are additional behaviors or contextual factors involved, the firearm could be described as one piece of a broader set of observations. If there is confusion regarding the validity or reciprocity of your concealed carry permit across state lines, that uncertainty may affect how the situation unfolds. The central takeaway is this. The ruling significantly limits the ability of law enforcement to rely solely on lawful gun ownership as justification for a vehicle search. That is a meaningful reinforcement of both Second Amendment and Fourth Amendment protections. However, it does not eliminate all potential legal issues. You must still understand your state's firearm laws. You must still ensure your permits and documentation are valid and accessible. You must still conduct yourself respectfully and cautiously during police encounters. And if you ever face serious legal exposure, consult a qualified attorney. Now let's move into practical guidance based on this ruling. If you are pulled over and you have a legal firearm in your vehicle, here are the steps to follow. First, keep your hands visible. Do not reach for documents, your firearm, or any compartment unless instructed. Second, if your state requires disclosure of a firearm during a stop, or if you choose to inform the officer, calmly state that you have a firearm and indicate its location. Speak clearly and avoid sudden movements. Third, if an officer asks for consent to search your vehicle, remember that you have the right to decline unless they have a warrant or independent probable cause. You can say politely, "I do not consent to any searches." Fourth, if the officer proceeds with a search despite your refusal, do not physically resist. State clearly, "I do not consent to this search," so that your lack of consent is documented. Fifth, after the encounter, document what occurred. Note the officer's name, badge number, patrol car information, and the timeline of events. If you believe your rights were violated, contact an attorney promptly. These steps are about protecting your rights without escalating the situation. But knowing how to exercise them calmly and intelligently is just as important. This Supreme Court ruling reinforces that constitutional protections do not cancel each other out. You do not surrender your Fourth Amendment protections simply because you exercise your Second Amendment rights. That principle is now firmly established. But here's what many people misunderstand about landmark rulings. They do not operate like an on-off switch. The court sets the legal standard. Real-world encounters still depend on facts, behavior, and how situations unfold moment by moment. Even with this 9-0 decision in place, there will still be close cases. There will still be legal disputes about what qualifies as a probable cause. There will still be arguments about what facts an officer observed and how those facts were interpreted. For example, if an officer observes what they believe is a violation of a state firearms regulation, even if that belief later turns out to be mistaken, The officer may argue that the belief was reasonable at the time. Courts often evaluate what a reasonable officer would have believed under the circumstances. If you are traveling across state lines, firearm reciprocity laws can complicate matters. A permit valid in one state may not carry the same authority in another. Confusion about permit recognition could become a factor during a stop. If there are additional facts present, inconsistent statements, visible contraband, or other suspicious indicators, a court may determine that the search was justified based on the totality of circumstances, not the firearm alone. That phrase, totality of the circumstances, is central in Fourth Amendment cases. Courts look at all relevant factors together rather than isolating one detail. What this ruling does is remove one shortcut. It prevents officers and lower courts from automatically treating lawful gun possession as the missing piece that justifies a search. It does not eliminate the broader framework of Fourth Amendment analysis. Now let's zoom out and look at the broader constitutional significance. A unanimous Supreme Court ruling is rare. When all 9 justices agree on a constitutional question, it signals that the issue is not ideologically divided. It signals that the court viewed the principle at stake as fundamental. The message is clear. Constitutional rights are not conditional on each other. You do not have to trade privacy for lawful firearm ownership. You do not have to surrender one amendment to exercise another when amendmental. The court reinforced that lawful conduct cannot be redefined as suspicious merely because it involves a constitutionally protected activity. That matters beyond firearms. It reinforces a general principle. The government cannot treat protected rights as automatic triggers for suspicion. Now, let's return to the practical implications for everyday drivers. If you are stopped for a minor traffic violation and you are legally carrying a firearm, the encounter should remain focused on the traffic matter unless independent evidence of criminal activity emerges. The presence of a legal firearm does not automatically expand the scope of the stop. However, your conduct during the stop still matters. Remain calm. Avoid sudden movements. Keep your hands visible. Follow lawful instructions. If disclosure is required in your state, comply with that requirement clearly and calmly. If disclosure is not required, understand your state's laws so you can make an informed decision. If asked for consent to search, remember that consent is voluntary. You may decline. A simple, respectful statement such as, "I do not consent to any searches," is sufficient. If a search occurs anyway, do not escalate physically. Courts evaluate roadside conduct carefully. Resistance can create separate legal issues. State your lack of consent verbally and preserve your objections for later review. Document everything afterward. These steps align with the constitutional principles reaffirmed in this ruling. Another important takeaway: constitutional law evolves through cases like this. Lower courts sometimes interpret doctrines broadly. When those interpretations conflict with constitutional protections, the Supreme Court steps in to clarify. That's what happened here. Some lower courts effectively treated lawful firearm possession as a justification to expand a traffic stop into a full search. The Supreme Court rejected that expansion. The automobile exception remains intact. Probable cause remains the standard. Officer safety considerations remain valid. But lawful possession alone is not enough. Understanding that boundary is critical. Now let's bring everything together. The Supreme Court has made it clear. Lawful gun ownership inside your vehicle does not automatically strip you of your Fourth Amendment protections. A legal firearm by itself does not create probable cause. It does not justify a warrantless search, and it does not transform a routine traffic stop into a full vehicle investigation. That is now the law of the land. But remember, knowing the rule is only part of staying protected. How you handle real-world encounters still plays a major role in how situations unfold. If you're pulled over, keep your hands visible and movements slow. Follow lawful instructions. If your state requires disclosure of a firearm, do so calmly and clearly. If it doesn't, understand your rights and your state's specific legal requirements before you're ever in that situation. If an officer asks to search your vehicle, you have the right to decline consent unless they have a warrant or independent, probable cause. A respectful statement like, "I do not consent to any searches," preserves your rights without escalating the encounter. If a search proceeds anyway, do not resist physically. Clearly state that you do not consent. Then document everything as soon as possible afterward. Officer names, badge numbers, patrol unit information, location, time, and what was said. If you believe your rights were violated, consult a qualified attorney immediately. Constitutional arguments are made in courtrooms, not on the roadside. This ruling is a significant win for constitutional consistency. It reinforces that your Second Amendment rights and your Fourth Amendment rights operate together. You do not lose one by exercising the other. The court sent a strong message. Lawful behavior cannot be automatically treated as suspicious simply because it involves a firearm. Legal gun ownership is not probable cause. At the same time, this decision does not erase the automobile exception. It does not eliminate probable cause standards. It does not prevent searches when independent evidence of criminal activity exists. And it does not protect unlawful conduct. It protects lawful conduct. It protects honest, law-abiding individuals who are trying to follow the rules. But laws vary by state. Reciprocity rules differ across jurisdictions. Firearm regulations can be complex. Staying informed is essential. That's why updates like this matter. Most gun owners don't learn about major rulings until long after they've taken effect. Sometimes only when they're already dealing with legal trouble. You're hearing about this now, which puts you ahead. Make sure you stay that way. Subscribe to the channel so you don't miss future breakdowns. My next video covers 3 states that recently changed their concealed carry laws in ways that could create legal problems if you cross state lines without knowing the updates. That's information you don't want to miss. To recap clearly, the Supreme Court ruled 9-0 that the presence of a legally owned firearm in your vehicle does not, by itself, authorize a warrantless search. Your Fourth Amendment protections remain intact even when you exercise your Second Amendment rights. Officers still retain authority to take safety precautions and to conduct searches when independent probable cause exists. You should remain calm, respectful, and informed during any encounter. And if serious legal issues arise, consult a qualified attorney. Candidates. This breakdown is for educational purposes to help you understand the court's ruling. It is not individualized legal advice. Every situation depends on its specific facts, and state laws differ. Stay informed. Stay prepared. Stay legal. I'll see you in the next video.